Have you ever heard about a wildlife photographer who got lost in his photography expedition? Well, he has a story in 5 minutes or less. There was a cold-ass morning on August 7th, 1981. Carl was at the end of a 5-month solo camping trip in the Arctic Circle in Alaska. He was preparing to get picked up at some point during the day. So Carl is chucking his last bit of supplies and ammunition into the lake just to make room in the plane, since it's a very small plane. And as he's about to chuck the last bit of ammunition into the lake, he hears a wolf on the other side of the lake howling. And he thought to himself, you know what? Maybe I should keep this last box of ammunition just in case, until the plane gets here at least. And that split-second decision was one that changed Carl's life forever. So as the day went by, as he was waiting for his ride, Carl has caught some fish, started a small campfire to grill the fish, sat in his trunk as he looked into the forest, just daydreaming about what a successful trip he had just had. Carl had picked up his journal to detail the last day of his camping trip, and he realizes the sun was coming down. His friend Rory, who was supposed to be picking him up, hadn't showed up yet. And by the way, you have to understand, for the last 5 months, Carl has not seen or spoken to a soul the entire time. And this was a time before cell phones and the internet, so your diary, calendar, journal was your lifeline to the entire world at that time, right? And to make matters worse, he was about 75 to 100 miles away from any civilization, so there was no way for him to make any calls or DMs to send out an SOS. And speaking of SOS, shout out to all the small channels that has been supporting this very small channel so far. And if you're a small channel, leave a comment under the pinned comment below so that other small channels can find you and we can all grow together. So at this point, Carl realizes that it's not happening today. Rory's not going to show up. So he whips out his tent again and set it back up and takes out his sleeping bag, gets into it, and just hoped and prayed that Rory shows up the next day. And as he crawled into his sleeping bag, staying at the roof of his tent, it just dawned on him that he might have made the biggest mistake about 6 months ago when he told Rory about this trip. You see, one day, Rory, Carl, and some other friends were out drinking, having some beers and some shots of vodka. I don't know what he drank back then, but I just assume it's vodka, right? So they're just having a jolly old time. And after a few drinks, Carl leans over to Rory and says, "Hey, you fly planes? How about you pick me up on my trip on August the 7th? And Rory, in a drunken state, is like, "Sure, why not? But then I still have to check my schedule just to confirm 100% with you, and then we can set that up." They agreed upon that, and that was that. And with all that excitement, Carl remembers at that moment that he forgot to check back with Rory to make sure his schedule was clear to pick him up on August the 7th. And with that thought, he realized that Rory was not coming, and he just might be stuck here forever. So days had gone by with no sign of a plane. Carl is spending his entire day catching rabbit, catching fish, and just thinking to himself how he can get rescued, or if he has to hike 75 miles to the nearest city. He realizes that he only has 1 box of ammunition left, and staying here, he'd just be a sitting duck for coyotes, wolves, and whatever predators, and there were countless predators there at the time. And on the other hand, if you have to hike 75 miles to the closest city, well, it's a lot of predators on the way, and the weather was unforgiving, so either ways it was a toss-up. He was gonna be in danger anyway, so he just sat there contemplating on the next move to make. But while he's sitting there eating his rabbit, he hears something in the distance. It's a plane. He has a plane coming towards him, so he gets super excited and he jumps up. And as soon as he can see the plane in his line of sight, he grabs his bright-colored sleeping bag and he starts waving it in the air just to make sure the pilot doesn't miss him. So the pilot starts flying towards him and flies super low to the ground. And as soon as Carl can make eye contact with the pilot, he pumps his fist in the air in excitement. So the pilot sees that, flies past him, goes and makes a big loop, flies back towards him, but then flies away. So Carl, seeing the label on the plane, he knew it was the Alaskan State Trooper, so his friends might have called the police to try to find him. So he was excited about that, but on the other hand, why did the popo just leave him there? So in this confusion, he's sitting there just waiting to see if the plane was going to come back around, and he just sat there thinking to himself, not understanding what was going on. So the night falls and Carl is now in his tent, just laid up, thinking to himself, like, what the hell happened? The plane never came back. He couldn't sleep, so he just lay there tossing and turning, wondering why the pilot would leave him there for that. But in order for his thoughts not to consume him, he decided to start rifling through his books and magazines and diary to find something to read, something to occupy his mind, because the sounds of anguish and anger just consumed him, and he just needed something to distract him from all that thoughts. So as he's rifling through his stuff, he finds his hunting license, and that's the only thing he hadn't read from all the collection of books, magazines, and even his diary that he's read multiple times. He had never taken a second look at his license, but today he had nothing new to read, so He starts going through the license. Then he sees something on the license that sends a chill down his spine. So weeks went by, and after a couple of months, Carl had accepted his fate. There were no other planes coming. The lake had frozen over, so there was no fishing to be done. The foxes, coyotes, and wolves had gone to his traps before he could get the rabbits out of traps. And the place had frozen over, so there were no more logs to keep the fire going. So on November 26th, Thanksgiving Day, Carl lay there sick, frostbitten, and out of options. So he picks up his diary to add one last entry into it. He laid his diary down next to his camera and his rolls of films. He picks up his rifle and that last box of ammo. He loads it up, and with that, Carl was gone. And the one illustration that stood out to Carl was the one that had the one fist in the air. It was the universal body language for all okay, do not wait. And that's what the state trooper saw that made him turn his plane around and fly off into the sunset. Only in February 1982 did the Alaskan state troopers find Carl's remains, along with his camera, his diary, and his rolls of films. Please hit the subscribe button. It does help the engagements. Until next time, cheers.